Hello, everyone. This is Xander Brothel, Director of Marketing Ops at CS2, with the Forward Thinking Podcast. Joining me today is Chelsea Byron, Senior Manager of Marketing Ops at CS2, to provide guidance on inheriting a new instance and how to wrap your arms around it. Welcome, Chelsea. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, Xander. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
That's awesome. This is the first time we've had you on the podcast, isn't it?
It is my first time. And funny enough, I actually found out about CS2 through the podcast. And so now we've really come full circle since I started here about 6 months ago.
Absolutely. I think that it's something that a lot of people have gone through. I know myself personally, that was my first real introduction to CS2 as well. So glad to know that the podcast was working in recruitment for both of us. So that's so awesome. Well, I'd love to just take a couple of minutes to introduce you to the audience. We will start to have some new voices on the podcast with new members of the team coming in to share experiences and projects and insights into some of our key topics. So, Chelsea, how did you get involved in marketing operations?
Definitely. So I started in college with a marketing degree. And I actually really started my career as more of a generalist, like a lot of us in MOPS probably did. I was always interested in data and analytics, and initially was presented with the opportunity to work in email marketing. And at the time was using Act-On marketing software, and eventually was part of a team that implemented Marketo. Which shortly after our implementation, my boss actually left the company, and I was the only person that knew the tool on the team. So they were like, Chelsea, would you like to, really spearhead this and take it on? And I'm like 2 years into my career and just said, sure, like, what do I have to lose, right? So I've really been in MOPS ever since. Certainly there wasn't a name for that at the time. It was digital marketing. So that's been what I've focused on. But and then in my past job, had a team of marketing specialists who worked in Marketo with me, and really, really enjoyed mentoring them and getting to have a sense of consulting within our team, and thought, maybe I could do this at a deeper level. Maybe there's more to this than, working in-house. So the role at CS2 opened up, and I made the switch to consulting and haven't looked back.
That's awesome. What's your favorite thing so far about consulting? You said that you've been with the team for about 6 months, so.
I think I love the most being able to work on projects, in multiple iterations, right? Like, for example, we do a lifecycle implementation. It's not just like a one and done project, right? Like we do it for one client, and then the next month we might do it for another. Couple months later, we'll do it again. So I find that every time there's something new to discover, which is fascinating to me. And I just like the iterative process that it brings, and really being able to help you fine tune your strategy and all of that each time.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like sales. You get multiple at-bats.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Well, great. So I'd love to jump in. Again, today, what we're talking about is inheriting an instance. We've been talking through a lot of strategy and how do we bring in the revenue growth architecture. And I feel like such a good place is you get a new instance, whether it's you're brand new to the company, or maybe it's multiple companies that are merging into one, and we're bringing on and bringing on multiple instances into a single one. So when you are in that situation, what do you recommend people start with to ensure that they're getting the most context before necessarily jumping in?
Totally. Yeah, I think it's, there's a couple steps that I would recommend. So the first is really uncovering the why. I think a lot of us have probably inherited new tech stacks or systems, and really before jumping into it, what I'd recommend is really trying to identify that why, and understanding the marketing strategy, right? Like what is your goal behind this? Maybe if it's a new role that you're in, you had opportunities to ask questions about it during the interview process, or whatever the case may be. But really understanding what that motivation is behind using your marketing automation tool. Things like your KPIs, your metrics, right? Like what is important to you? And really getting an understanding of, what are you currently using? What kind of reports are you looking at? What kind of dashboards do you have? How are those being socialized within the company? Are they being managed well? And then really just also identifying any gaps, right? Like trying to really hone in on those before you kind of get through to the next steps that we're going to talk through.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're listing a lot of things that we do when we're coming into a brand new client, right?
Totally.
It's the interview process. Also, like, nothing is more valuable than just getting current state documentation if you have it, and hopefully you do, right? To give you kind of a starting point. So I always recommend that as well, is reading anything that you do have access to. And really, like, what can you say toward understanding like how the marketing team is going to market when it comes to this?
Definitely.
Like, I know for me, I always find if we have a strong focus on ABM, it's going to make a lot more sense about how your system is set up versus I have a strong focus on PLG, right? And your priorities are going to align differently depending on what that go-to-market strategy is. Have you had any experiences so far when you're bringing on a new client that you discovered something up front that really changed how you approached a project?
Definitely. I think in a lot of cases I've seen, there are certain elements that are really fundamentals to marketing automation, like lifecycle and lead sourcing, that it doesn't take long for us to ask the right questions and get into their tool to understand, okay, we've got some things to work on here, right? So I think just trying to identify some of those quickly, and sometimes the client or you in your role may have an understanding of what those things are off the bat, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you've gained some context and you're learning a little bit about like how people are using it. Who would you recommend connecting with to kind of build out that scope?
Yeah, so I think that this is a really important part, is really understanding the who, understanding who's using the system today, how is it being utilized. I personally like to focus on sales and marketing and really emphasize those teams. Within marketing, understanding, are you utilizing a decentralized or a centralized model, right? Like, do you have a bunch of cooks in the kitchen, or is it just a designated MOPS team that's in the tool? Really just taking time to identify those stakeholders and get to know them. I mean, even outside of your objectives with marketing automation, like, use the time to really understand their goals and what's driving them in their roles. And ultimately, to, especially if you're coming into a new role, use them to really understand what the team's expectation is for marketing automation. How has it been used in the past? Are there insights that you could glean from them that could kind of help guide you along your discovery process, right? So,
Yeah.
of course, you need to do your own checks and balances according to what they say. But I think kind of using that partnership to really understand the historical knowledge is helpful.
Super. So it sounds to me right now kind of like focusing on the marketing team is a great place to go. What teams would you recommend connecting with who are outside of marketing?
Yeah, so I'd say sales next, right? If you have a sales ops team, I think that that would
Mhm.
be really important to connect with them and partner with them, get their buy-in. Again, understand what their pain points are, um, and expectations. Another good resource could be your CRM admin, web development. You know, there's people within IT that you may need as a resource. So just reaching out to them as well, and having those initial conversations. I think it's best to just go ahead and involve people early on, so that way by the time you're all said and done with your strategy, you're able to have those stakeholders to present to.
For sure, for sure. I also find if you have a team that has like an analytics team, maybe somebody
Hmm.
that's owning like a data warehouse or a centralized BI solution, that those folks can be really useful to have as a part of your kind of cohort, so to speak. And it's really important, like as you're starting to meet these people, to understand what are their priorities,
Totally.
because you're probably coming in and there's going to be a lot of change that you're trying to introduce into the systems, and they all talk with each other, right? So if you can get involved in like weekly syncs, or if they have sprint planning or things like that, like how can you insert yourself into the process so that way you're not, disrupting the system. Inevitably, you're probably going to disrupt the system because you're a new person into it. But if you can make that
Yeah.
transition easier, all the better, right?
Yeah, definitely. I've even held office hours with certain groups, like sales ops, to say like, hey, let's just allocate this time, whether that's once every other week, once a month, to have brainstorming sessions, working sessions, really just keep that communication open, especially as you're inheriting a new tool, I think is key.
For sure. Um, one team that I also find that's super useful to get engaged with is procurement. If you are
Yeah.
lucky to have a procurement team who can like go to bat for you when you're negotiating new contracts, because we're talking about inheriting an instance, but let's be real, marketing ops typically owns multiple tools
Yeah.
nowadays. And so, not only can procurement help you with the procurement process, but they can also help you identify owners of integrations, tools that you didn't know that you had access to, tools that nobody knew that they had access to. And those may be findings that you can say, let's eliminate tools A, B, and C. You're coming in, not even doing a lot of work, but you're already saving your organization money. That automatically gives you a win when it comes to folks on the finance side.
Right. Yeah. And even things like renewal, like keeping up to date with when systems are renewing, if you want to even renew them or potentially look at other tools. Definitely.
Absolutely. So you've identified who you want to work with. You've identified some of the larger why we're doing things within the systems. So now it's kind of like, what do we need to find, right? So how do you
Yeah.
go about digging in and getting the information that you need out of your instance?
Yeah. So here comes the fun part, right? Is really rolling your sleeves up and getting your hands dirty. So I think the biggest piece here is documentation and really, defining and documenting the current state, whether that's, I like to call it an audit or a diagnostic, but just diving in deep to your instance in this case, and looking at some of the fundamentals, right? So whether you're utilizing kind of like an audit template or whatever that document like might look like to you, um, looking at a couple of things. So thinking about fundamentals like life cycle, for example. Um, life cycle is one that we see many variations of. Really taking a look at, okay, are the stages being clearly defined? Are we date stamping things properly? Taking a look at the data and evaluating it. Do we have these different marketing or sales dashboards set up that are needed?
That's a
I
big
would look at,
one, right?
yeah,
Like, especially as we think about the life cycle. Um, I think that a lot of organizations, they have the life cycle in place in some capacity, but are they utilizing the data to make decisions? That can open up a whole different can of worms that you may not be necessarily thinking about.
totally. And do they have it documented, right? Like sometimes it's like, oh, well, we know it's working, but we don't totally know how or that. So I think that this documentation you're creating is really something that you can refer back to later on when
Mm-hmm.
you're not deep in the weeds and you may not remember every single little detail. Um, the other thing, one of the other things I would look at is like scoring, right? So that's
Mm.
another key fundamental for us that we look at during our assessments. Um, are we scoring on demographic and behavior? Is it just one or the other? Um, have we actually used some kind of analysis to really think about, okay, of our existing MQLs, are we how are we taking that and informing our values and prioritizing the scoring model? Um, are we lacking data on specific fields that we're using for scoring? Really just trying to get that full picture painted um, within each of these areas.
Are you
Um,
reviewing it on a regular basis? Is the sales team engaged in actually evaluating that scoring, right? It's such an
yeah,
arbitrary thing, but there are ways that you can go about doing it that can be more objective, right?
definitely. So I think too, like lead source and attribution, another big one that we look at here at CS2. Really trying to understand how are we assigning opportunities to a source. Um,
Hmm.
One thing we talk a lot about is the where and what problem. So, are we really capturing where the person came from and then what they converted on, right? Like sometimes organizations are looking at maybe one of those two things, but really making sure that we've got both of those accounted for.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a big difference. It's not easy to do, um, but like when you find a good solution to be able to get that data in place, oftentimes we're looking at utilizing like the Salesforce campaign and then stamping
Mm-hmm.
UTM parameters onto that. And there's other solutions, right? You can get a actual attribution tool to help. You can do multiple ways of solving that problem, but first things first is to understand what are we doing in current state, if anything.
Right. Definitely. I'd look too at your lead process. What kind of SLAs do you have in place for that? What's the handoff process like? Is that clear? Is there alignment between sales and marketing on that? Um, that alignment is key across a lot of these different areas, right? Like
Yeah.
one department might think they have it figured out while the other one sees gaps. So, really making sure that there's that clear alignment.
So you bring up an interesting point of that alignment. When you're meeting with those stakeholders, do you recommend doing surveys? Do you recommend doing one-on-one conversations? Because you can get a lot of these answers from like a system perspective, but you can actually get it from your end users and their understanding of how these processes work.
Definitely. Yeah, I think, it probably depends. For me, I personally like to have a conversation. I find that people are often more engaged in a one on one conversation than they might be in just a survey. Maybe they don't feel like they have the time to take a survey, but they're willing to hop on a phone call with you. So that's what I kind of tend to like to do. And again, that's helping you build a relationship and ultimately getting that buy in um, and helping them feel heard and listened to, which is half the battle some of the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, and then lastly, I'd say a couple other key things. Look at the data integrity. Like, where do you have maybe loss in data that could be coming from automations that are running? What does your database look like, right? Is it full of unsubscribes and people that you can't even market to? That might be a case where you want to recommend purging those people. Um, as our listeners probably know, a lot of marketing automation tools actually charge you based on the amount of people you have in the database. So,
Mm-hmm.
often we hear that from clients like, oh, we're reaching our maximum number of contacts. We need to do a database cleanse to just kind of purge. So that's a big one too. And then campaigns also. Campaigns, what's running well? Are there nurtures that are included in the system? Um, what's running on an ongoing basis? Like, first of all, you need to make sure that you can keep the lights on, right?
Yeah.
And keep those, whether they're, autoresponders or nurture programs, make sure that those are running well. But take a look at the reporting too, and understand, is there context around maybe when and why we're sending emails? Is there a strategy to this? I think that's the next big piece of it that I would recommend is the reporting, and really getting a sense of, what you're reporting on today, what maybe you could be reporting on, and how those reports are being shared. Are they automated in some fashion? Are they even asked for at all? Like, it's sometimes you're just having to start from scratch. So
Yeah. Something that we really try and get all of our clients on is like a analytics framework, right?
mm-hmm.
What is your central, just dependable dashboards that everybody in the organization can go to? Because we've talked about it many times. Nothing's worse than walking into an MBR and marketing has a report and sales ops has a report, and they're different information, and everybody gets confused. So the more
Yep,
that you can align that data, the better, right?
definitely.
One
Yeah.
thing that I wanted to quick do is go back to the campaigns conversation. You bring up a really good point of like understanding what the always on is, what the nurture is, and something that can go a long way is to kind of do a secret shopper experience. Like
Hmm.
fill out a fast track form, fill it out with a fake not a fake email, but like an email that you could receive feedback to. Do you get the response? Do you get sales reaching out? Do you get a phone call? Do you get a nurture track? All of those sort of things can go a long way of actually testing out the always on evergreen programs.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm a big fan of, I like to call it testing your own instance. Like, and I like your term of the secret shopper, like really just getting in there to fully experience it yourself. Because you're right, like sometimes you may not have any idea that something's running until you test it out and you see the flows. So
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Get
totally.
that customer experience as a customer.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, the audit and the discovery, it could really be a good time to bring in an outside agency too, right? Like, a lot of times teams don't have the time to do a massive audit of every single detail within their instance. Um, you know, they really want to understand current state, but they may only be able to get certain pieces of that. So, or maybe they don't even know, like maybe they know they need a life cycle, but they don't really know what that could look like. So I think, that's a time when some of our clients have brought us in to actually really do the deep dive for them. And we report back with our findings and recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember coming into new instances, and you kind of have to take what you have from your experience. So if you don't have a lot of experience, it's nice to be able to bring in somebody from the outside. Even sometimes when you have a lot of experience, like I've worked with plenty of clients who have been doing marketing ops for decades, but they just go, listen, I have a lot of things I'm trying to solve right now. So can you work on, auditing and letting us know where the gaps are? Because you want to be able to document current state, but if you can't compare that to a better practice, we try to avoid saying best practice because there's not really a best practice. There's so many different ways that you can solve a problem. But if you're not able to bounce that against, what to be working, you can just leave with a list of to-dos and not really a great way to figure out how to solve it.
True. Very true. Yeah. And every inherited instances, I mean, it honestly will always present some type of unique challenge, right? So
Yeah.
I feel like getting an outsider's perspective on that is really crucial to the success of the tool.
For sure. And it's also really important, like as you're coming into an instance that, there's no judgment. Don't judge, because at the end of the day, like everybody was making the best decision that they could make with the budget and the time and the expertise that they had. So, I don't believe that people are coming into work to like destroy all things. Right. So, for the most part, at least, hopefully not. And at the end of the day, like we can all try and make things better. So, making sure that you're not throwing people under the bus because maybe some of those stakeholders that you just met were a part of the decision-making team that did a thing, right? So if you are throwing things under a bus, it's not usually a good way to build allies.
Yeah, that's a quick way to step on some toes.
For sure. So you've gone through, you've done this amazing audit. How do you figure out what to work on first?
So, I really at this point like to focus on addressing the red flags, right? There's going to be things that you uncover that are just screaming and firing alarms. You need to really take a stab at those first. As much as we do, really want to be strategic about this. If you uncover that you are violating GDPR or, you don't have the proper security measures in place, such as SPF, DKIM, like you need to address those probably pretty quickly, sooner than later. Right. So really taking those and then just any kind of like low hanging fruit, and thinking about from your large documentation, your list, like where can we really get the most bang for our buck pretty quickly out the gate. So identifying those quick wins and tackling those red flags.
For sure. Is there a good way that you found to like actually document that and highlight that for stakeholders?
Yeah. So I think, as you're documenting through your audit, really taking a list of your priorities, creating a list. And I would say, really even taking that a step further and developing a roadmap.
Great. Yeah, something that I just wanted to kind of like chime in with that we do at CS2 that we find to be very helpful with clients is like we'll build out a priority matrix. So we'll have, the low hanging fruit, low effort, high impact in that upper left quadrant, high impact, but more effort in the upper right, and then low impact, low effort, and then low impact, high effort. Right. And by being able to kind of bucket there, that's where you can really say like, these are the red flags or the low hanging fruit. Let's identify that first. And then you can start to look at the next two buckets when you start to roadmap.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think to your point of the priority matrix, having that list of priorities is what you could utilize to then map out that matrix, right?
Yeah. So as you're thinking about the roadmap, are there any specific recommendations on how to like specifically, is there a way that you can balance I have to keep the lights on and I have to keep operating the business versus these roadmap items that might take a lot of time? How do you balance the two?
I think one thing is really fine tuning your request process. If
Mm,
you have teams that are, requesting new projects from you, really creating an intake process around that will be extremely helpful, so that you can kind of, you know, gather requirements first and foremost, but also really help you prioritize to say like, okay, does this fit on the roadmap? Does it not? Is it is it a priority? Is it not? If it's not, then it can probably wait, right? And
mhm.
so that would be a good starting point. Um,
Absolutely. I think also having that roadmap and having it prioritized and then starting to be able to like give rough estimates in terms of timing, even if it's t-shirt size, right? Like this is an extra large project, this is a 2x project, this is a small, it can really help you tell a story. And maybe you need to start advocating for more resources, whether that's another hire, maybe this is your opportunity to start trying to build a team. It could be another opportunity to bring in outside resources and really help you understand like there's so much work that we need to make. This is the benefit that we can bring to the business if we do it, and then bring along your executive team to try and make that decision on whether or not you want to make the right investments to get all of the things done.
totally. Yeah, and I think too, focusing on long-term projects, right? Because right out of the gate of an audit or discovery, you're going to have a lot of small things, to work on too. But really fixing your focus on long-term projects that align with that roadmap, I think are going to be really crucial for your success.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So just talk to me a little bit about, like, let's say that we have a roadmap and we get three of our really large initiatives done. What's the long term? We're not done after we just launch a new project, right? So what's that long term vision?
Yeah, I think that especially in marketing operations, we're always improving. We're always, skilling up. And what I would really recommend is staying close to the stakeholders that you've worked with during the discovery phase, even as you're road mapping. Stay close to them, understand their pain points, and what they're working on to really open your eyes to potential new challenges that they may be facing that you can help with, and incorporate into your roadmap. You may just not have visibility to that if you're working in more of a silo.
Absolutely.
Um, so keeping that conversation open, I think will definitely yield some work along the way that you can add to it.
For sure. For sure. Well, fantastic. Chelsea, are there any like just closing thoughts that you have toward these topics?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that I would highlight. So the first that I'd really encourage our listeners or anyone that's inherited a new instance recently, is take some of the pressure off yourself to fix everything immediately. Like, it can be overwhelming to go through all of this discovery and find issues and think, oh my gosh, like I have to fix everything right now. And that's just not the case, right? I mean, hopefully it's not the case for you. I think in most positions, people are understanding that these things take time. Um, Really, really, and I can't emphasize this enough, get to know your systems, get to know your internal processes, um, very closely before you start diving in, making changes, because the last thing you want is to make a change that could impact something downstream that you didn't have visibility to because you were only looking at the surface level, right? So, once you're ready to make those changes, I'd recommend keeping a change log. That's something we do for a lot of our clients at CS2, just to have documentation of what kind of updates are being made. A lot of monitoring goes on when changes are made, so really maintaining that to keep track of updates. is going to be key.
Fantastic. And then Chelsea, as you think about, what do people do wrong when they come into a new instance? What are some of the gotchas that you want to highlight?
Yeah, I think one thing is sometimes people expect that they're going to catch everything the first time around in their audit. They may not understand that it doesn't just take one diagnostic, right? Like, it's no matter how well your system is set up or how well you fine tune it, we're in marketing operations. Things are going to break. I think most people are aware of that. So just being prepared to discover something new and being open-minded to that versus kind of coming into it thinking that you're going to solve all the world's problems in one day.
Give yourself some grace, right?
Yeah. And then lastly, I'd say, stay focused. Like I mentioned with the requests earlier, I think it can be easy to get overwhelmed with new requests that are coming through. So just really give yourself that permission to, maybe not focus on it immediately, take in the requirements and understand the need, but certainly don't fall into the trap of getting too reactive and, stay the course so that you don't end up in a situation where you're not able to deliver on your roadmap because you've, tried to take on other projects along the way that maybe weren't as high of a priority.
Absolutely. Yeah, that request process can go a very, very long way.
Totally.
Well, Chelsea, thank you so much. This was such a good topic, right? And just to kind of recap, because it's a meaty topic, what we're talking about is really starting with the why and getting an understanding of the context to why decisions were made, why the instance is set up the way that it is. And then also, what is the why for your marketing team? Are you focused on ABM? Are you focused on demand generation? Are you focused on PLG? Is there a mixture of all of those things? As a MOPS professional, it's important to identify that up front. It's also important to understand who you should be engaging with, whether that's inside of the marketing team so that you can really understand what your marketing goals are, or outside of the marketing team, specifically with sales operations, IT, the sales team themselves, analytics, other teams that you may need to be engaged with to make sure that you're aligning your priorities with theirs, or at the very least, getting your priorities heard by that team. After you've identified that, you want to make sure that you are identifying the what. So you're going into your systems, you're understanding all of the processes, life cycle, lead sourcing, lead scoring, taking a look at all of the reports and dashboards, and really making sure that you have a clear understanding of how all of the systems are working together. And then take all of that information and identify your roadmap. Prioritize the red flags and the low-hanging fruit, and put together a plan and size that plan for the future. And make sure that that's communicated out with your executive team so that you have the support that you need to make the biggest changes in your instance that you can make. That was the Forward Thinking Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed the podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could give us a review. If you're watching us on YouTube, give us a like and subscribe. Thank you so much. This has been Xander and Chelsea with the Forward Thinking Podcast. Goodbye.